midst marker. My name is Daniel Vallis, and welcome to our channel. We've been talking about the Revelation 12 sign, both with the woman and the dragon tail sign that is going on at the same time before the woman gives birth. And I want to point out something that several people have gotten confused about, is the woman is the great sign. The woman sign is the unique one, the one that is rare. The dragon sign is just described as a regular wonder, a regular sign, token, signal, sign. That's what the word wonder there means. It's just another sign that's ongoing. The woman sign is the great sign, though, the rare sign. And within the context of that, John is mentioning that he also sees this other sign. It's not great, but it is going on at the same time, marking off a time period. It's another wonder in heaven with a great dragon. The first one's with a great sign, this one's with a great dragon. And that's because Draco is a large constellation, and it's known as the great dragon. And we've been talking about how it's slowly turning over time, and it's going to be facing the woman when she's ready to give birth, just like the sign describes. It's not a rare sign at all, but John is just mentioning that it's going on while the woman's sign is pregnant before she gives birth. Then on September 23rd, everything is in place. And again, Draco is a large constellation. It's even larger than Virgo, which is itself a large constellation. So by itself, it's a great dragon, but it's not a great sign. The woman and all the celestial actors getting together for that is a great wonder. That is a great and unique sign by itself. But this other countdown is going on while that sign is going on. And John is mentioning it only within the context of the woman's sign, while it's doing that. So even though Draco does a complete turn every single year, he's mentioning that it's going to be doing a partial 1/3 turn during this time of pregnancy while she's travailing, and it's going to mark a time of travail. Now, another common question that has come up is, if the Revelation 12 sign is really in the midst, are we in the tribulation? And if not, how can it be in the midst, seeing we only have about 4 months till this sign takes place? Well, we are obviously not in the tribulation. None of those events have happened yet, and the world will definitely notice when those do start. And, like Revelation chapter 5 describes, the redeemed of the Lamb will be in heaven with him when he opens the very first seal. So the rapture is going to take place before the tribulation events start. But the Revelation 12 sign is going to be in the midst of the tribulation. And to understand how that can be, we have to look at what the Bible says about where the midst really is. The midst is at the Revelation 12 sign, but it's later than most people think. Let's look at a timeline of prophecy. What prophecy says about this end time, Christ's first coming and his second coming, knowing in between those he'll be making his appearing when he gathers his bride too, just before the tribulation events start. Now we're familiar with Isaiah, and he prophesied about 700 years before the time of Christ. Isaiah 7:14, Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive, and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. We're familiar with this recognizable sign that God was going to give about a virgin giving birth to a son, particularly the one named Emmanuel, God with us. But it's also interesting that this prophecy is twofold, and it's even hinted at in this prophecy here. In verse 13, he's talking to the house of David as a whole. And he's saying that the virgin will call the child's name Emmanuel, but one day, O house of David, you will also call his name Emmanuel too. You will one day recognize him for who he is. There is a twofold prophetic significance to this sign and to this prophecy. And he prophesied that about 700 years before the time of Christ. And then about 500 years before the time of Christ was Daniel, a very famous prophet who spoke on a lot of things connected to Christ's first time and also the end time events where we are now as well. Daniel chapter 7 covers a lot, and obviously you could spend days and months talking about Daniel. We're just going to focus on some very select things here. But in Daniel chapter 7, he's talking about Messiah, and he's also talking about the Antichrist too. In verse 13, I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. This is an amazing passage which the Lord brought to my attention yesterday, especially in context of everything that we've been studying lately with Christ's first time. Here, Daniel is telling us about a vision he had about seeing the Son of Man, Jesus Christ, coming in the clouds of heaven, but it's not the direction that we normally suspect. He records that he's seen the Son of Man travel with the clouds going to heaven, going to the throne room. He is being taken to the throne of God before the Ancient of Days. And this is what we talked about lately, how the Bible tells us he was taken up. He was taken to the throne of God, which also Revelation 12 records as well. This is amazing because Daniel is recording in prophecy before Christ even ascended to heaven that he would one day do that. And it's recorded that the Son of Man, the Messiah who would come, would be taken to heaven, would be taken to the throne room of God. This is recorded even in the Old Testament. And Daniel recorded how he saw this happen. This was prophetically going to happen. And how this Son of Man would be given a kingdom that he would rule on forever. And this is recorded in Daniel chapter 7. But just a few verses down, he's talking about the Antichrist again, and in this whole chapter as well. But he mentions something unique with the Antichrist. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. Now this is really important when we understand who is recording this prophecy. Daniel is, the same one who is recording prophecies about the Messiah, the Son of Man. And Daniel tells us that the Antichrist has been thinking to change times and laws. He's been planning this, it's been part of the mystery of iniquity, and he records that it will be given into his hand. It will be given into his power until a time and times and the dividing of time. Now that phraseology should catch your attention because that's 3.5. A time is singular, times is plural, that's 2, and then the dividing of time, that's a half. So 3.5. And Daniel is saying the Antichrist is going to be allowed, he's going to be given power, it's going to be given into his hand to change times and laws for a period of 3.5. And this is not just talking about shuffling things around on a calendar. No, Daniel is talking about something that nobody has ever done. They've never been allowed to do it. Because at the beginning of the book, Daniel makes it real clear who is the only one who can change time. Daniel 2:20. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings, and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise, and knowledge to them that know understanding. Notice that Daniel ascribes the ability to God that only he can change the times and the seasons. This is something exclusively attributed to God. Only he can change the times and the seasons. But then he receives this vision about how one day the Antichrist will be given power. It will be put into his hand the ability to change times and laws just like God does. And we've talked about before how the Bible records this concept of putting into Satan's hands certain powers, certain natural physical powers of creation. In the story of Job, the Bible records how God gave Satan power. He gave him authority to use natural forces such as fireballs and whirlwinds. Satan was given that power over the natural realm, over creation in those areas. And likewise, Daniel is saying that one day he's going to be given power over time and laws, the laws of nature, that have not been given and put into anybody's hands up until that point. But take note that Daniel does put in a qualifier. It's only going to be for a time and times and the dividing of time. And obviously, since Daniel is telling you he's going to be changing time, he can't list and tell you exactly how many days or the actual time period that it will take, but he does tell you it will be within a recognizable pattern of 3.5. He will be allowed to change time in a recognizable pattern and only for that time pattern. And of course, with the Antichrist, we know there are 2 3.5 patterns before the midst and after the midst. Satan is going to be allowed to mess with time before the midst, as we're about to see, and only before the midst. And so keep this in mind with the Revelation 12 sign and also the midst. Even though it seems we're getting close to the Revelation 12 sign, prophetically, the Antichrist, as soon as he is unrestrained, when he is unrestrained, he's going to be given more power than most people normally assume with the tribulation events. He's going to be given incredible power over time and laws for 3.5 periods of time, for the purpose of giving himself more time. So he's going to be able to push back the hands of the clock to give himself more time, because he is trying to avoid a celestial date. But he's going to have the power to push back the hands of the clock. But we can be assured that it's only for that portion of time. Verse 26, But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. This is an amazing passage because it does tell us that the power is going to be taken away from the Antichrist. His kingdom's going to be destroyed. His dominion's going to be destroyed. And the everlasting kingdom, the kingdom of the Messiah and of the Most High, that is going to come in. And I thought this passage in Daniel was really interesting because it foretells, even hundreds of years before the time of Christ, that when he does set up his kingdom, he's going to have subservients set up as kings under him. He's going to have regents set up under him. He's going to divide his kingdom into sub-territories. But I thought this was interesting how the emphasis still brings it back to, even though he does have his saints ruling under him, all dominions still serve and obey him. The Son of Man will always be preeminent. The Son of Man is the one who holds the power. The Son of Man is the one who rules all nations and all kingdoms and all dominions. He is the one who is given the recognition in that, not his servants. We got to keep this in mind even when looking at the Revelation 12 passage and even prophetic passages about the future. Even though Christ will have servants set up under him in various levels of responsibility depending on their responsibility that they demonstrate, even though he has those servants in those positions, it is always recognized that he is the one who holds the power. All nations and all dominions will serve and obey him, will obey and serve the Most High. So this is amazing when you think that these were written hundreds of years before the time of Christ. And the disciples and the Jewish people would have this thorough understanding taught in the synagogues and schools as they grew up. They understood what the sign of the Son of Man was. They knew who the Son of Man was. They knew how his kingdom would be set up and how he would be the one holding the power. He holds all scepters. All people, nations, and languages will serve him. All dominions shall serve and obey him. The focus is always on Messiah, not on his servants. This is understood hundreds of years even before the time of Christ. But we remember that Daniel also wrote about how the Antichrist, when he comes onto the scene, he will be given power for a certain amount of time to give himself more time. So Daniel wrote about the Son of Man, and we know from the New Testament he was taken up to heaven to await till his enemies be made his footstool. And that's what Daniel saw prophetically. But Daniel also wrote about the Antichrist, things he would be doing. But Daniel also wrote when the Messiah, the Prince, would be coming, when the Son of Man would be coming. In 9:25, Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again and the wall even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the Prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate. Okay, this is the passage where we get the understanding the Antichrist, the Prince who will come. He's going to confirm a covenant for 1 week, but he's going to break it in the midst of the week. And in the context here we see the weeks used as periods of years, even tied to when the Messiah, the Prince, will be coming as well. How he's coming after a period of 7 weeks, and then additionally 62 weeks on top of that. And we've talked about this before, but Daniel is the one who foretold to the day when the Messiah would make his triumphal entry, when he would come and present himself as the king. And Daniel had this information about 500 years before Christ came onto the scene. And this information is what the wise men used to figure out when they should be looking for the star, because they knew when Messiah would be showing up, and they knew roughly what age he would have to be for the Jewish people to accept him as a leader. And so they were looking in a ballpark window, a time frame, and that's when they saw the celestial signs, the scepter star that was prophesied of Shiloh as well. They had an understanding when he would be showing up onto the scene, and the signs were seen in that expected window. And of course, with that contextual knowledge, that also drove them to go to Bethlehem to make that trip, because there were more things in their understanding that, yes, they already had a broader understanding Messiah was expected to be showing up around that time, because they knew he would be born of a virgin. And so he was going to be born, and so they traveled to Jerusalem, and then they directed to Bethlehem, and that's where they found the Christ child, and they saw the sign that Isaiah prophesied. A virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. And that was given as a sign. They saw that fulfilled in the human body of Mary and the Christ Emmanuel. So they saw prophetic events start here with the sign of the Son of Man, how he would be born as a child, but he would not stay that way. He would grow up to be a man. And that's why you see Scripture refer to him as a man-child, because it's condensing his life. He would come as a baby, but he would reign as a king, as an adult. It's condensing his life story. He was a child, but he grew up to be a man. And so on the prophesied day that Daniel spoke of, the 69 weeks, that is when he rode into Jerusalem. And he rebuked Jerusalem because they did not know that was their day. They were not living in expectation of him showing up. The religious people weren't stirring the people up and getting them ready for it. Largely, nobody was looking for him and expecting him on that day, or even at that general time either. So that led to the judgment with the events that led to the Arch of Titus. But this was the fulfillment when the Son of Man rode into Jerusalem, fulfilling Daniel's prophecy and the further fulfillment of what Isaiah prophesied as well, because it was Emmanuel who rode into Jerusalem. Now this timing is very important. This window between the triumphal entry yet before he went to the cross. There's only a few days, just about 3 days between those, but some very important conversations happened in this window. And so we got to keep in mind the backdrop when Jesus is telling these instructions to his disciples. They were about to have some very important conversations where Christ was going to leave some very important instructions that would be useful in the days and even the years ahead. And he even told them, I'm foretelling you this because I'm about to go away, but this will be very important later. But he was telling them this with it on their mind that he had just fulfilled Daniel's prophecy. He had rode in on the exact same time. And so this was on their minds, the content of what Daniel already said. They knew this was the fulfillment of it. They already knew he was the Son of Man. There was no question in their mind about that either. And they knew the story about the sign of the Son of Man, because later Matthew would describe it in detail, especially about the wise men, and John would talk about it a little bit later too. They knew all this prophetic background here. And so you always got to keep in mind, sometimes when Christ is saying things, you got to consider what the disciples already knew. Because he's going to say things assuming you've read the previous books and you've already understood a general idea of prophecy. So you will not understand prophecy if you ignore the books before it. But it's in this context between the triumphal entry and the cross is when he had the conversation in Matthew 24 and in the parallel passages in Mark and Luke. And his disciples came to him, and this is only about 2 days right after the triumphal entry, and they were asking him when Jerusalem was going to be destroyed and the temple destroyed and things he had been mentioning to them. They came to him and they asked him 3 questions. And this is very important to even understanding Matthew 24, to understand how it starts out and to understand the questions they're asking him and why they are asking him those questions. Those aren't just random questions. There's prophetic background from when they grew up, things they've heard in synagogue also, that are coming into play when they're asking these questions. They ask him one question, tell us when shall these things be, what he's just talked about. The second question, what shall be the sign of thy coming? because they knew he was coming later to set up his kingdom, the kingdom and dominion that would rule forever. He was the Son of Man. They want to know, when are you going to be setting up your kingdom? We already know you're going to be doing this. What's going to be the sign that you're coming back to do it? Because they understood there were prophetic events that would come before that, they just did not know how does all this come together. What's going to be the sign that we need to see that will tell us you are coming again to set up your kingdom? And then their third question was, what about the end of the world? And that's the end. That's not the end of the tribulation or the rapture. That's not the end of the world. They want to know, when's it all going to end? When are you going to make a new heaven and a new earth? So they ask him these three questions, and he's going to be answering that for a good portion of the chapter, up and through verse 31. Then after he answers their questions, then he goes back and fills in the blanks in their knowledge of what they really need to be looking for. And it contrasts with what he had just told them before. Because he's basically telling them, I'm coming before all those events start. I'm coming for you, my wise servants who are watching. I'm coming before all those events start. I highly suggest you watch our video, Understanding Matthew 24, where we walk you through it in a lot more detail than we have time for here. We're going to focus on right now, though, their question, what shall be the sign of thy coming? Because they knew Daniel's prophecies that the Son of Man would be coming to set up a kingdom. And he would set up different responsible and wise servants to be rulers and kings of different sub-kingdoms who would rule in parts underneath him, even though he would still hold the scepter. They knew this was prophesied to happen. They wanted to know what was going to be the sign of it. And so we got to keep this in mind. They were asking a question about Daniel's prophecy. They weren't just asking a random question. It related to Daniel's prophecy because they knew that would happen. And they knew that he was the Son of Man. So they wanted to know, when is this going to happen? Is this going to be happening very soon, or do we have to wait a while? What's going to be the sign that you're going to be doing this? Now, in answering the first question of theirs, he put extra emphasis on something that would come into play later, though. Verse 15, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Okay, so he's setting a context here as he's answering their question and he's leading up to the sign that they're asking about. He puts extra emphasis on this one single subject, which he doesn't do for any other subject. He parks here for a minute and he says, basically, make sure you understand what Daniel said about the abomination of desolation. This is important when you remember they were asking him a question about his coming that Daniel said. They were talking about Daniel before he was. And now Jesus is directing their attention back to Daniel. He says, make sure you understand what Daniel said about the abomination. Make sure you understand that, because that plays a very important part in the timing of what's being described here and the sequences being described here. And one of their questions was, when are these things going to be happening? And he was emphasizing, you need to understand. Not just read it, you need to understand what Daniel the prophet said about the abomination of desolation. And this special instruction was also mirrored in a parallel passage in Mark 13:14. But when ye shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let him that readeth understand, then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains. And so he was emphasizing and underscoring, you have to understand the events of the abomination of desolation. Who's doing it? Why he's doing it? Where it's taking place? You have to understand all these details that Daniel tells you about the abomination of desolation. So that way you'll know when it's going to be happening and when you need to be fleeing, and you'll know what to be looking for and expecting. But you have to understand what Daniel said about this particular timing, which takes place at the midst, when he turns against Israel. And so again, let this sink in. They were asking him a question about a subject that Daniel mentioned, and he's bouncing back their attention back to Daniel, saying you really need to understand this one thing he said about what he's going to be doing, the who, the what, the where, the when, the why. Why is the Antichrist going to be doing the abomination of desolation? When is he doing it? Where is he doing it? You need to understand this. And again, this is the only subject that he emphasized to his disciples. Make sure you understand this. Because understanding what events lead up to the midst and why the Antichrist is doing what he's doing at the midst will help you understand what comes before the midst. Why is he angry? Why is he turning on Israel all of a sudden? And so after he emphasized that they really needed to understand that, he answered their question about what particular sign would tell the world he was getting ready to come and set up his kingdom. He said, "The stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven." Okay, they already knew who the Son of Man was, and they already knew what the sign of the Son of Man was. The only new detail was that he emphasized you're going to see that sign in heaven now. Matthew would record how it appeared on earth with the human Mary, so they understood the mechanics of what happened with the sign. Jesus just said you're going to see the exact same thing, you're just going to see it up in the heavens. It's going to be a celestial sign with that exact same story, with a virgin giving birth, but obviously I'm not going to be born again. The story picks up as an adult, picking up with the Son of Man, because that's who's coming back to set up his kingdom, the adult Son of Man. And again, that's why Revelation refers to him as a man-child. It's telling his story. But when he told him the sign, he made it clear that there were going to be events happening before that sign finishes and reaches the birth point. There's going to be a time of travail before that, and it's going to be abnormal. It's not going to be just normal celestial events happening. The stars are going to be falling from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. There's going to be some incredible, unnormal things happening in the heavens and in the world that will mark it as very distinct. And then, after the heavens are shaken, then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven. It will finally reach its completion, when all the parts of that particular sign finally come together and appear and show in heaven. And so in telling them what sign would be seen, they understood the meaning, but then he was also telling them qualifiers of how it will be seen, and what to look for, and when to look for. So there's a lot of information in just that brief summary he was giving them, but because he had already told them, they needed to have the understanding that went with it, of what Daniel said about that time. And keep in mind, John is in this audience here too, talking and hearing all this information as well. Now, it's also interesting in this exact same conversation is when Jesus told him, when these things that I've been telling you about, particularly with the fig tree prophecy, when all these things begin to come to pass, then look up. You need to start looking up. You need to start lifting up your head, because there's going to be celestial signs that will tell you your redemption's drawing nigh. And I'm coming before the time of travail, which is the whole subject of the conversation there. But he's telling them when they need to start looking up and expecting the celestial signs, within the context of the fig tree prophecy. And this really helps boil down the Revelation 12 sign for us, particularly because we know it is within the context of the last generation. There's multiple conditions on top of each other that let us know, yes, this is the sign of the Son of Man. This is the sign that he was telling his disciples, signals that he will be coming very soon. Now, of course, shortly after this conversation was the Last Supper events and the crucifixion, the resurrection, and then followed shortly by the ascension, where the Son of Man was taken up into the clouds of heaven, and he went to the throne of God to wait until his enemies be made his footstool. So the event that Daniel foresaw was now taking place here, just days after the event he had prophesied before, when Christ rode into Jerusalem. It's all coming full circle. It's all coming together about the Son of Man and all the descriptions that are ascribed to him. He was caught up. He was taken up. This was understood for hundreds of years even before Christ was born. The Son of Man, who was born of a virgin, was caught up to heaven. The disciples fully understood this. And so here we are at a time roughly 2,000 years later after these events have taken place. And Christ has told us and left instructions about what signs we should be looking for and when we should be looking up and lifting our heads. And so when we see celestial events, we keep in mind what the disciples knew about these signs, what the prophets prophesied about them, their understanding about these signs that we see. We should not try to reinterpret them or try to change them. No, they have specific meanings. And to get the best understanding of what we see now, we listen to Christ's instructions about what they mean and what they are and the timing of it all. The parts we don't understand how they're going to happen, that doesn't change anything. We look at what he has told us about, the whys and the whens and the wheres and timing, and that gives us an understanding for where we are now too. There's a lot of things in the tribulation events in the book of Revelation we can't explain how they will happen, but we can understand that they will happen. So we take the understanding that we are given and we go forward with that. And so 70 years ago, Israel was replanted. The fig tree bloomed. The tree still has a lot of growth to go, but that was the marker of when we needed to start looking up and lift up our head, because that was going to mark a lot more prophetic events would shortly come after that within a last generation of seeing that prophetic sign. And so now we are drawing closer towards September 23rd, 2017. It's only about 4 months away, and we can see this on the horizon. And it matches all the visual descriptions of what Christ said the world would see, the sign of the Son of Man. And even Revelation 12, John rehearses the story in brief, just to remind us, she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. When you understand all this was prophesied before it even happened, this further reinforces the disciples knew 100% what the sign of the Son of Man was. They knew fully what it meant. There was no question in their mind at all, because this is what it was prophesied to be, even before it happened the first time. And so we got to keep this in mind when we look at the Revelation 12 sign too, keeping in mind what Isaiah said it would be, and also keeping in mind how there is a second fulfillment to it. The house of David will call him Emmanuel one day. There is a second part to that prophecy still. And then what Daniel said about it, that affirms and confirms everything we see in the Revelation 12 sign. It is totally about Emmanuel, the Son of Man, who will rule all nations. All dominions shall serve and obey him. It's all about Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And we've seen an incredible rehearsal with the backstory of this sign. So many things confirming what our understanding should be of the sign. Recalling to mind Daniel's prophecy that foretold he would be caught up to heaven. And then we see John rehearsing, after having seen it happen, that he was also caught up to heaven. Multiple confirmations all tying together with future prophecy, tying in with past prophecy. It's all about this Son of Man, Jesus Christ. It is his sign that he is getting ready to come sometime after that marker point, that celestial date marker. And again, it should not surprise us that when we lifted up our heads, when we started to see things come together more and more, and we started to realize we're nearing the end of this last generation, and we started to see the Star of Bethlehem signs, we started to see an incredible parallel to what the wise men saw when the Son of Man came the first time. So many incredible things reinforcing what our understanding of this sign and this time and the meaning and all the other prophecies that go with it should be. When we see it reinforce what the meaning is, that also in our mind reinforces what Daniel said about the other parts of this sign and of this time. Of even the parts we don't understand what he said about the Antichrist changing time. We can't understand how that's going to happen, but we see celestial reminders. We see prophetic understanding given by our Lord at this time to reinforce, yes, the sign is what we have told you it means. Go forward in faith on that. But keep in mind, understand what Daniel the prophet said, because that also plays a part in understanding this celestial date marker. And the more that we study this celestial date marker and the signs and the new information that John has added to it with the dragon tail sign going on as well, that also gives us an idea of the time frame. We know sudden destruction is coming, and it matches up with what Jesus said about the sign of the Son of Man. It's going to be coming before she gives birth. And we've just entered into a time where it is expected to start any day now. That sudden destruction, that time of travail, when the Antichrist is going to be unrestrained, and he's going to have incredible power over times and laws, the laws of nature. The powers of the heavens shall be shaken. It is going to happen before she gives birth. And it's going to be off the charts of what our understanding can handle at the moment. But we go forward in faith, knowing that it will happen and being reassured in the understanding of what Daniel said about it. Because even though we draw close to the September 23rd, everything is still on track. Because as long as we understand what Daniel said about it and why Christ emphasized you need to understand this point, we can go forward knowing this is already accounted for. Even though a period of 3.5 years that we normally come to with first assumptions, even though that should have started back in 2014, we can go forward understanding what Christ emphasized we needed to understand. That time is not going to be registered normally, that when Satan is unrestrained, he will be getting more time. So we should not let the time understanding hinder us, seeing how little time there is when we understand that Christ and Daniel said he will have more time. He will be making himself a lot more time. Time is not a hindrance to the fulfillment of what is happening here. It should actually be counted into the understanding. And so the more we understand what Satan's going to be doing when he's unrestrained, think about that right now. Why is he restrained? Because he wants to do some incredible things that are going to shake the powers of the heavens. He's really restrained right now. That's why things appear relatively normal in the world right now. But once he's unrestrained, things are going to get really perplexing, as Jesus said. The entire world is going to be wondering what in the world is going on, because Satan is going to be allowed to change times and laws. And that time of 3.5 cycles, 3.5 years, will fit into the time that he gives himself. And when we look at the Jericho picture, and we even look how Revelation is described in a nested loop fashion, it looks like he's going to be fitting 3.5 years times 6 into a period, giving himself what appears to be a lot more time, avoiding a celestial date marker, avoiding the midst. See, Satan knows the power of prophecy. He knows at set times prophecy will be fulfilled. When Christ rode into Jerusalem, prophecy was being fulfilled on that day that was prophesied, that Daniel said it will happen on this day, and it did happen. Satan knows on September 23rd, that's a date marker that he does not want to get to. He wants to turn the clock back from that, because when the clock strikes on that date, and that sign of the Son of Man appears in heaven, his time is short. It's all downhill for him from there. So he wants to avoid that date if at all possible. And so he's going to be using the power given into his hand for a time, times, and the dividing of time. The Bible does not specify how long the first half is, but there's a inference that it's 1,260 days, but it never comes out and states it, like it does for the last half. It always refers to the first half as the time, times, and dividing of time, because that is the time given into the Antichrist's hand. It apparently will be a set of 3.5 literal years repeated, so it keeps repeating a set amount of time. So, in one way, it is correct that it will be 3.5 years to the midst, but they're going to be squeezing a lot into those 3.5 years. There's going to be a lot of experience in those years. And again, in Luke 21 is where he describes, and on the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. What's going on during this time, this time, times, and dividing of time? It scares the entire world, fills them with perplexity. They cannot understand what's going on because Satan has been unrestrained in ways that the world has not seen before. And it is with this in mind that Christ warned his disciples that the tribulation was coming as a snare. It's coming on all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. It is a snare. It's a dimensional trap. It's a time trap. It's a snare. Watch ye therefore, and pray always, that ye may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass. Prophecy will be fulfilled. It is coming. This snare, this trap, this time trap, that even they won't be able to escape, is coming. And if you are watching, servants, making yourself ready, then you can escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. Christ was warning them. You know these things are coming, and when you look up and see them beginning to come to pass, you need to live in light that I am coming back, not that I'm delaying my coming. You need to live as though your Lord is returning, especially when you see everything that I've told you to be looking for. And if you're not, well, remember Lot's wife. Satan is going to be allowed to mess with time, and this is apparently why people can't die for that period of 5 months, because they keep coming back. Time loops. You die and you just keep coming back. And you'll see this conditioning a lot in Hollywood movies, especially very lately. You've seen a strong emphasis on time. They're acclimating people to the idea of time changing and time looping. and alternate histories. Because Satan wants to avoid a date. He wants to avoid the midst. He does not want to come to the midst. But the Bible does tell us it's going to be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. One day it will be taken out of his hand. He's only going to be able to play with time for a set amount, and then his time is up. The buzzer's going to sound. His little time loop playtime is going to end. And apparently, time is going to come out at September 23rd, 2017. That's when the height of his power and glory is up, and it's all downhill from there. And he knows it. And this is why Revelation chapter 12 specifically tells us why he is angry. The devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. It's all about time. He doesn't just suddenly realize halfway through 3.5 years, oh, I'm wasting my life. I should really get on the ball here. No, he is suddenly angry because the buzzer sounds and his playtime ends abruptly, and he realizes he has no more ability to change time. No more ability to push off this date. His time now really is short. He starts acting like a bull in a china shop and going after Israel and having great wrath because he no longer has it in his hand to change time, to give himself more time. The Bible even tells us this is the specific reason why he is angry, because he suddenly realizes his time is very short from this moment. Because up until that moment, he thought he had all the time in the world, but things changed in a moment. And the Revelation 12 chapter tells us specifically there's 1,260 days after this celestial date marker. It never comes out and tells us specifically how much time comes before that. Always refers to it in an ambiguous way, the same wording as Daniel referred to it as. But the second half, it straight up tells you, oh, it's 1,260 days, 3.5 years. Because time is no longer changed. He no longer has it in his hand to change it. He's really angry, but there is a set amount of time after that point. If you have not yet, definitely download our Time of Perplexity booklet. We've just given an overview today of a lot of these concepts, but you can find a lot more information in our booklet. It has a lot more illustrations. And you got to keep in mind, we emphasize this on page 1. Even though this sounds strange with time changing and all that, start reading the book of Revelation. It gets a whole lot weirder. The sky opening as a scroll, creatures coming from the bottomless pit, people not being able to die for 5 months. There's a lot of things happening in the first half of the tribulation that you and I can't explain how it's going to happen. But it's enough for us to know that it is going to happen. And we've been forewarned about it so we can keep it in mind as we do look forward. And that also gives us an understanding of where we are now, too. There's going to be a time of great perplexity that's going to affect all the nations on the entire earth. It's a snare. We have a lot of notes about biblical understanding of time and different examples. We have different explanations of how it appears the book of Revelation is described in a sequence very similar to the story of Jericho, which is the story of 7 within 7. And that's the way the trumpets and the seals and the bowls are often described. A nested set within another set. It is a spiral of events. It is a looping set of events. And then I also suggest you watch our playlist, Revelation Spiral of Time, where we talk about and go through the different graphics and just try to explain it and wrap our mind around it too. We think we have a pretty good understanding of how it's going to play out, but we just put out our understanding of it in these videos, so definitely check those out. You'll also want to check out our video with Perplexity that focuses more on that and talks about the differences between changes within time versus changes to time. We just chew on these concepts more of what is he actually trying to do with time. But definitely download the Time of Perplexity booklet because that will give you a lot to chew on just with that. It makes a great reference and also future reference for others as well. And if you haven't, I suggest you also watch our video Harpazo of the Lamb, how he was taken up. This was the apostles' understanding. And then also the booklet, the Revelation chapter 12 sign. A lot of information in there, 40 pages worth of information. And all this was given for our understanding, so we would watch, and we would understand that these tribulation events are coming as a snare. There's going to be almost no warning on the surface level. Christ is coming during the days of Noah and Lot, and so we should be watching for what he told us to watch for, so we won't be caught in that snare, so we won't be living like Lot's wife, so we will go forward shining bright like the wise virgins, so we will be serving our Lord and our Master as wise servants, and we will be looking for him as wise men. We have been given the warning, he that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. We have been warned to watch what our bridegroom has told us to watch. We've been warned to listen to the warnings that our bridegroom has given us. And we've been told when we see these things begin to come to pass, we should look up. We should lift up our heads, for our redemption draweth nigh. We see how the Lord has given us incredible wisdom in calling us forward and showing us what these signs mean, bringing Scripture to our remembrance, what our bridegroom has said. When we have an ear to hear what the Spirit saith, then we will have wisdom, then we will have understanding, because we are listening to what we should be listening to, and we are listening to his voice, and we are rising up and going forward in faith and shining bright, seeking to have the words of our mouth and the meditations of our heart acceptable in his sight. We have heard so many trumpet calls at midnight telling us the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. And so we rise up, we shine bright, and we serve our Redeemer, our beloved, Jesus Christ, first and highest above all else. Maranatha.